And hello, everybody. This is Rich Massaro, and the name of the show is The World as We See It. And today, I think it's going to be The World as We See It / Local Legends. Haven't done a whole lot of preparation for the show, so I'm just going to wing it. And, you know, just before we went on camera, I have to tell you, just to warn everybody, I felt the sneeze coming on, and it never came on. So, you know, I don't care if we have a cough button. I hope we have a sneeze button, because you never know what's gonna come up. The thing I wanted to start out the show with today, and it, eventually these people will probably be local legends, but we had a school board meeting probably within the last month where one of our teachers, Jim Smith, who does our all of our plays and musicals, when we're going to start to have them when the new auditorium opens, brought a group of kids in, and they had placed, I want to say, they came in 3rd place in the state, and just talked to Kevin right before camera time, and it was an improv group. I think they're called, and you know what, it's escaping me. He said GRI, and I can't think of what those initials mean. But the thing I wanted to say about that is this show, a lot of times, and when Jim is here, which he will be in the future and has been in the past, we've decided to focus in on sports. And obviously acting is not sports. But I thought to myself after the meeting, and I did mention it to somebody, what a great job Jim Smith and obviously the people who work for him did, because the way they explained this thing, and I asked some people here before the show started how many Harry Potter books there were, and it seems to be the consensus is 7, maybe 8. And what they did is they took all of the Harry Potter books, and then they had to actually, within a half an hour's time, do an improv and take you through the stories in those books. At least that's the way I understood it. And when I started to think about that, I thought, man, what a fantastic job. I mean, where do you come up with the idea, and I'm talking about Mr. Smith now, where do you come up with the idea to condense 7 or 8 books, the whole, and those are, I've seen them, they're not, I've never read them, but those are not thin books, they're thick books. And the people cannot appear in costume. So I guess they improvise and they may appear in some type of costume, but the costume's not germane to the books, and still give you the sense of what's happening in the books, and then do it all within the space of a half an hour. So a tip of the, now comparing this to coaching, I mean, a coach's job really is a walk in the park compared to that, at least in my estimation, and I've coached a little bit. The other person that I have to mention, and I'm looking at, we have 2 gentlemen on the camera that I don't think I know. I don't think I've been introduced to them. We have people in the control room on sound. And the thing I was going to say is, I used to joke around with Kevin. For a while, I called him K-Zaff, you know, after Coach K, or K-Rod, or A-Rod, so I made it K-Zaff, and kidded him a little bit with that. But you know what? He's a guy who also does a fantastic job. And when I see some of the people that come out of this program, and sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's larger, but I'm thinking we had Joanna Dyneck with us the last 2 or 3 years, and all she did in the course of her high school career was, at the end of it, receive scholarship offers from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford. Which is pretty good, fast company. And then just recently, Joe LaPaglia received an award, and I apologize to Joe. He was our cameraman for, and chief cook and bottle washer, I would say, for our broadcast of Ridgewood basketball on TV, and just a really good person. And just received an award for what they call, I believe it's the whole West Cook division of the Illinois Association of School Boards, which takes in a whole bunch of schools. And basically, if I could put it in a nutshell, that was sort of a Good Citizens Award in terms of being a student that Joe won. And I guess my point would be that I don't even know if we pay Kevin to do this. He could fill me in on that later. But we get some really quality people that work here on the cameras, on sound, what have you. and Kevin is another guy. Obviously, he's not in the coaching part of but does a great job with the people that he's got. But the other thing I have to apologize for is I'm used to another chair. So I'm used to being up like this and sort of talking, being in position. I'm sitting back in an easy chair. I feel like I'm at home watching TV or something. I'm watching myself on the monitor, which I almost never do when I'm up in this position. And so I apologize. I'm still getting used to this a little bit. But on to the local legends part of this thing and tying this into sports. I wanted to talk today a little bit about a gentleman that probably at least the people in the studio aren't familiar with. He's not a graduate of Ridgewood High School, but it had such a huge effect on this school. A gentleman by the name of Jake Fenley. And Jake Fenley's name came up, I would say within the last month. Mike Glob and Tony Carangella and Mike Strawn and I met with Rob St. John, who was our AD here at Ridgewood, and we were talking about the history of the school, and we're the co-curricular committee, so we're talking about the history of the school in terms of sports. So after the meeting, I'm thinking a little bit about the history of Ridgewood as far as sports go, and I myself have I was a part of it from 1965, I guess you would, 65 through 69, and then attended games and still stayed active as a board member. And now we're doing some games on TV, basketball and football-wise this year. So we're talking about the history of Ridgewood sports, and Jake Fenley's name came up. And Jake Fenley, to fill people in out there, and maybe if you're an old-timer and you go way back and you're into high school sports, Jake Fenley had 2 sons and 2 daughters who went through this school. I think 3 of the 4 participated in sports and are up on the Wall of Fame. That would be Mike, Tommy, and Patty. But Jake himself, and you could take a look at this. There's a book in the Eisenhower Library by Taylor Bell, and it's all about the history of the state basketball tournament. And just to fill in the blanks a little bit, today, if you're a basketball fan, high school basketball fan, you would say, man, Simeon just four-peated, and they are a Chicago team, and the Chicago teams in the state tournament are always strong. But if you go back in the history of the state, way back to when the state tournament started, in the 1930s, for instance, Chicago was considered weak. I mean, teams from Rockford and Taylorville and Peoria, those were the strong teams. They dominated the state tournament. And then in the 1940s, there was a coach that was hired at South Shore High School by the name of Tony Mayfield. And his dream was to get the Chicago schools prominent in the state tournament. And he did that in the early 40s. And then at the end of the 40s, he had a young guy come in by the name of Jake Fenley. And Jake Fenley, of course, is a Norwich resident, former Ridgewood High School board member. And to make a long story short, Jake was an all-state basketball player at South Shore, went down to the Final Four a couple times with South Shore. And now how does this tie into Ridgewood? And I see we're coming up almost to the end of a segment. I always worry that I'm not going to have enough for a segment, and then I always go too long. But I'll try to wrap this up and then go to the next segment. Jake now is a parent here at Ridgewood and sees that the programs, the sports programs are, in the late 60s, they're sort of struggling. His kids are ready to come into school, and so he decides to get active. And he runs for the school board with some other gentlemen. They get elected, and now they're going to make some changes. And one of their focuses is on our sports programs. And we have, it looks like, am I right there, Kevin? Is that about a minute left? 1 minute? So let me quickly say some of the people, and then we can wrap this segment up and we can continue the story on the other side. But some of the people that were involved with Jake Fenley were guys by the name of Art Monaco, Bill Emmerich, Bob Hitzel, Dan Ramito, and various other people. And they were all parents. They decided to get involved. to change the culture of the school, and got elected to the school board and proceeded to do exactly that. With that, I see we have about 30 seconds to go before break, so if you don't mind, I don't think I can wrap up what my thoughts, so let's wrap it up right now, and then we can go continue this on the other side. So we will see you on the other side.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. But it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
And hello again, everybody. This is Rich Massaro. The show is The World as We See It / Local Legends, and we're talking about a real legend and Jake Fenley. And I'm sorry if this is sort of disjointed. I didn't think that much about the show before I came on, which is actually not that unusual for this show. But I have to tell you, you know what? Jake Fenley was an amazing, just an amazing guy. I'll never forget, I don't know, there's probably some of you who remember the old Dapper's restaurant that was on Cumberland Avenue. And I'm sitting at Dapper's restaurant one day, and I'm reading the paper. I'm at the counter, reading the paper, and one of the old sports columnists, I think it might have been Jerome Holtzman, I'm reading his column, and you could have knocked me off the stool with a feather, because he's talking about Michael Jordan, and he's saying in the column, and I don't know, if any of you are basketball fans, but Michael Jordan used to do a thing where he would go to the basket and he rolled the ball off of his fingertips into the hoop. And Holtzman is saying in his column, I have not seen anybody since Jake Fenley, other than Michael Jordan, do this. So Jake Fenley, what he's saying is the only other person he's ever seen do this move is Jake Fenley. And I'm like, holy crap, I know Jake Fenley. And he's comparing Jake Fenley to Michael Jordan. So you can get an idea of what caliber player Jake was when he was in high school. And I should also say that Jake went on and played 4 years at Northwestern University, and also played a couple years in the NBA with well, it wasn't the Detroit Pistons, but at the time it was a much smaller NBA, the Fort Wayne, Indiana Pistons. And Jake, the other thing about Jake, and this is an interesting thing because I'm looking at people who are holding cameras and are in the control room. Jake was vice president in charge of sports sales at WGN-TV and a great friend of Harry Carey. I know once in a while I'd be watching a game, and maybe at spring training, Harry would say, hey, and my great friend Jake Fenley, I see him down there in the boxes, and let's go have a cold one after the game, Jake. And Jake was just that type of man. He was what you might call a man's man. And I mean, if anybody has a sense of what Harry Carey was like, well, they were buddies, Jake and Harry, because Jake was just exactly the same type of guy. He loved to have a good time. Jake was a guy who would leave a party at 2 or 3 in the morning, and then you would see him at 5 or 6 in the morning at Dunkin' Donuts having his coffee and a donut. So he's a man who lived life at both ends, burned the candle at both ends, required 2 or 3 hours of sleep to, to function. So back to Jake and his role at Ridgewood High School. They get elected to the school board, Jake and his friends, and they decide, well, you know what, we need a new football coach, we need a new basketball coach. I cannot give you the details on the football coach, who ended up to be Mike Mariani, and is a Hall of Fame coach, was Ridgewood's coach from, I want to say, 1970 or 71 till about probably 1979, is in the Hall of Fame, Illinois High School State Hall of Fame. That was their choice as football coach. But Jake got his old basketball coach from high school, Tony Mayfield, to come out with him, and they were scouting basketball coaches. So they end up, they're at a tournament in Elgin. It's a sophomore tournament, and there's a team in the tournament, Elgin St. Ed's. And now these are sophomores, so they're not going to be super huge kids. But I mean, you know, you're talking basketball players, so you're going to get guys who are over 6 feet. There might be a sophomore 6'2", 6'3". You might throw a 6'4" guy in there. You might even get somebody bigger. But the Elgin St. Ed's team has no player taller than 5 feet 10 inches on the team. And they proceed to go out and just wipe up everybody in the tournament. And Tony Mayfield sits there with Jake Fenley. He says, that's your basketball coach. Well, the gentleman's name was Ron Kalina, and they approached Ron after the game and said, you know, how would you like to come and be head basketball coach at Ridgewood High School? Now, over the years, I've become personal friends with Ron Kalina, so we've talked about this many times. And Ron told me, he says, hey, I'm 24 years old. I'm coaching Elgin St. Ed sophomores, and these two guys who I don't know from Adam come up to me, and they asked me, do you want to be the varsity coach at Ridgewood High School? And I said, oh, yeah, I'd be interested. And Ron later told me, he says, I have no clue what Ridgewood High School is, where it's at. It could be, you know, at the other end of the state for all I know. He says, I don't know a thing about Ridgewood High School. But to make a long story short, he takes the job and proceeds to, Ron is not in the Hall of Fame. And I could actually say, I think that to be in the Coaches Basketball Hall of Fame, you may need 300 season wins. And Ron retired, probably shy of that mark here at Ridgewood by about 5 or 6 wins. And he was just physically, at the end of his time here, burned out. I'll never forget his last season. His last 2 seasons, we were conference champions. I don't know about the people who are in school now, but if you had been in school prior to this, in the old gym, and those plaques will go back up, but there were plaques from Kalina's teams, conference champions, individual 20-game winners, plaques with every player's name and the coach's name were in that gym. And so quite a legendary coach in the history of this school, if you want to say it that way. And the thing I was going to say about Ron is that when he retired, okay, he was shy, again, just a handful of victories, but he was totally burned out. I remember at the end of his last year, I would see him on a regular basis, so I wasn't noticing any changes. But one of my friends, who was one of his former players, came to see a game, and after the game, he said, well, you know, what's wrong with Kalina? I said, what do you mean, what's wrong with Kalina? And this guy said, he looks terrible. So I took a closer look, and you know, he had no complexion. He was white, but he was the type of, I mean, white, I mean, as like a ghost I'm talking about, not ethnicity or anything like that. But he was the type of guy, when he did a job, okay, he wasn't just a basketball coach. He wasn't just a guy who ran practices. But you know what? You would see him leave the gym, say, at 6 o'clock at night after his practice. And said, Ron, where are you going? Well, I'm on my way to so-and-so to scout so-and-so. So what I'm saying is he was a very thorough guy. And it showed in his teams. I can distinctly remember watching his teams, and they'd get into a tight spot. They might be really, they might be down 6 with 45 seconds to go in the game. And my distinct impression of them was, man, they are so calm. How is it that how does he get them to stay so calm? And he told me one time, he says, you know what, I never in practice have these guys run a drill. He says, all of these guys, we don't do the weave drill or whatever other drills they do in basketball. He says, those guys, they're varsity players. They know how to do that. We don't have to spend time on that. So what we do is we take situations that could come up in games and we practice those so that when we're in the game and those situations come up, we're ready for it. And I can tell you that I saw most of his games over the period of time that he was the coach. And that's a fact. I mean, we'd be in tight spots, and these kids were as cool as could be. They knew exactly what was expected, exactly what he wanted them to do. One of the greatest compliments I ever heard given to a coach, a friend of mine by the name of Bob Abilio, his son Bob Jr. was on one of Kalina's teams, and his statement to me, and this wasn't something that was drawn out of him, he said, you know what, Bob, his son Bob said, you know, we know if we can keep the game close to the last couple of minutes that coach will think of something that'll help us win the game. And I thought, man, I mean, you know, that is a great compliment for a coach to hear. So you're talking about a guy who was obsessed. He was very prepared type of person, and just an outstanding guy, and one of Ridgewood's local legends. The other thing that I would say about Ron is that I'll never forget, we played the last year he coached. We went to Lamont to play for the conference championship. And our second best player and our biggest player was a guy by the name of Mark Macias, who played baseball for Coach Furking and was drafted by the Toronto Blue Jays baseball-wise, but was an outstanding basketball player. So we're playing Lamont. We're at Lamont. At halftime, we're down by, I don't know, I think it was like 14, 16, 19 points. And Macias has got 4 fouls. So all the parents are talking in the stands. They're saying, "Oh, he's definitely not going to start Macias in the second half. He doesn't want him to foul out." The second half starts, and Macias walks out there, and he starts the second half. He goes through the whole second half. He never fouls out. We come back from 19 points down. We win the game. We win the conference championship. And after the game, when I had a chance to talk to Ron Kalina, I said, Ron, I said, why is it everybody thought that you would, keep Macias on the bench with 4 fouls? He says, Rich, you know what? He said, think about this. He says, if I keep Macias on the bench, and we're going to go to break, I see that. He says, if I keep him on the bench, he says, what's to say by the time that I decide to use him that the game's not totally out of control because he's not in there? What's to say that by the time if I sit him for 3 or 4 minutes, now we'd be down 25 and never have a chance to come back. So I told him to be careful, don't foul. He didn't. We came back, we won the game, we won the championship. And with that, I've really gone over where I was short the first time, so we'll go to break.
Hi, my name's CJ. A few years ago, my father became seriously ill. I did what I could do before he passed, but it took its toll. I lost my job, my house. I'm getting back on my feet, but I don't know when there'll be food on the table. How'd I do, CJ?
We could be twins.
Well, cousins, maybe.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
I'm here to tell you that reckless driving is the #1 cause of teenage deaths. But with new and improved Slow Down, you don't have to die.
We should slow down.
There is no spokesperson to prevent reckless driving. Speak up.
Kim, pay attention.
Hello again, everybody. This is Rich Massaro. This is the final 3-minute segment of the program, The World as We See It / Local Legends. And you know what? I would just like to thank the people, and we got a bunch of people behind the scenes. I asked Kevin before we started, I said, what the heck? How come we have all these people? Because a lot of times we shoot the show in the morning, and so we might be short, let's just put it that way. But I know, I'm not going to remember everybody's last name, but I know we have Sebastian and Alex on cameras, Tiffany, and we have 2 Jameses behind the scenes, and I think I'm forgetting one person. Okay, that's good. And you know what? I'm sitting here for the last 10 minutes, and I see this face staring out for me from behind the glass, and it's John DeVita. And I don't know, I'm not even looking at the camera for the last 10 minutes. I'm looking at John. And John, if you listen to, it's WRHS, the radio station, comes on with his history program. I can't think of the exact name of the program. I think it's Meet the Chicago Historians, is it, John? And the thing I'm thinking about is, John, I haven't been there yet to the DeVita Broadcast Center, but John has showed me pictures of that. And obviously, we talked a lot about Jake Fenley on this show. And one of the things I was going to mention, when I mentioned that Jake was a vice president at WGN, and seeing the people working the cameras and the people who are in behind the scenes in the booth, and seeing John, who I know loves broadcasting, and he's mainly a behind the scenes guy. When he does his shows, you really don't hear John talk. You hear other people that he brings in talk. So he really has a love for this this medium, both radio and TV. But the thing I was going to say, Jake used to tell me, he says, you know what, at WGN, you'll see guys pushing brooms who have degrees in communication or whatever the degree is that you need to get into radio or TV, just so that they can get their foot in the door and hopefully at some point in the time that they're there, be seen and maybe get on air or whatever their thing happens to be, become what they actually are trained for. So I'm not saying that anybody here is going to be in that profession, but one of the things that I had thought about talking about for this show, and then I never got to because I got off on the local legends part of it, was competitiveness and how it comes into being in all form, and in everything you do in life. It's not just sports. I mean, that's an obvious thing, but it comes into in this business as well. I mean, when you're talking about somebody who's just willing to push a broom, maybe from midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning, just so maybe they'll get to know somebody or see somebody or meet somebody that can help them in the profession. You know just how competitive the world is. And that's not to say that you can't survive or do well in the world, but the thing that I would say is you just have to be prepared and be ready for that competition and be hard-nosed about it. So with that little nugget, I guess you would call it, I thank my audience. I thank the people who work behind the scenes here. It's great to be with you again because we haven't done this in a while, and we will see you next time on The World as We See It. Thank you. Good night.
.323 to 584.